here? What did you do? Claire, please, listen to me. I was protecting him.
Claire Whitfield would spend the rest of her life regretting the 40 seconds. It took her to reach for her phone instead of listening. She came through her own front door at 4:47. That afternoon to a scene that made her blood turn to ice before she'd even sat down. Her bag, the door frame splintered near the lock. A lamp shattered across the living room floor. Her son Leo screaming from somewhere upstairs in the specific raw, terrified way infants cry when something in their world has gone violently wrong. And Sophia Reyes, the nanny Claire had trusted with her son's life for the past 8 months. Standing at the top of the stairs with a bleeding scratch across her cheek and Leo clutched tight against her chest. Claire did not ask what happened. She did not pause to consider that the woman standing protectively over her screaming. Son might not be the danger in this scene at all. She screamed at Sophia to get out of her house. Right now, in Sophia, shaking, bleeding, still holding Leo as though her arms were the only thing standing between him and something unspeakable, opened her mouth to explain, and found that Claire had already turned away, already dialing, already deciding. In the space of one terrified, misdirected minute, to end 8 months of trust over a scene she had completely misread, it would take, Claire less than an hour to understand exactly how wrong she'd been. It would take her considerably longer to forgive herself for it. Claire Whitfield was 34 years old, a marketing director who had built, over the 18 months since her divorce, a life she was fiercely protectively proud of, a modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburb, a demanding but manageable career, and at the center of all of it, her 11-month-old son Leo. The one unambiguous good thing to survive the wreckage of a marriage that had ended not over the ordinary erosions of incompatibility, but over something considerably darker. Claire's ex-husband, Damon Whitfield, had a temper that had taken her nearly 4 years to fully name for what it was. A slow, escalating pattern of control and intimidation that Claire had spent the final year of their marriage documenting carefully, quietly, terrified, before finally leaving with a restraining order that legally kept. Damon, 200 feet away from both her and Leo, the order had been in place for 11 months. Damon had, as far as Claire's attorney and the court records could confirm, complied with it entirely, no violations, no contact. Nothing but an unsettling silence that Claire had allowed herself, cautiously, to interpret as the danger finally receding. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness has no rank and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to The Overlooked, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. Sophia Reyes was 29 years old, and she had taken the nanny position with the Whitfield household 8 months earlier, carrying her own private history with exactly the kind of danger that would arrive at Claire's front door that Tuesday afternoon, though neither woman knew, until it was almost too late, how directly their two stories would collide. Sophia had grown up watching her mother survive a relationship that had, in its final year, turned violent enough that Sophia, 14 at the time, had learned to read the specific warning signs of an unstable man's escalation before most adults twice her age ever needed to. The particular quality of a knock at the door, the sound of a car idling too long outside a house, the wrong kind of silence. Her mother had survived. A neighbor 2 doors down, a woman who had tried to intervene during the worst of it, had not been so fortunate. And Sophia had carried the weight of that loss for 15 years, along with an unspoken, unbreakable promise she'd made to herself in the aftermath, that she would never again stand by uselessly while someone she could protect was in danger. No matter what it cost her personally to act, she had not told Claire any of this during the interview 8 months earlier. It had not seemed relevant to a job description built around bottle schedules and nap routines, but it had shaped invisibly every instinct Sophia carried into that house each morning, a heightened, almost involuntary awareness of exits, of who was supposed to be where, of the specific sound a house makes when something in it has shifted from ordinary to wrong. That Tuesday had started like any other. Sophia arrived at 8. Claire left for a full day of client meetings by 9. And Leo, who had been fussy with a new tooth coming in, spent most of the morning in the particular clingy, easily soothed rhythm Sophia had learned to manage over 8 months of near-daily practice. Around 2 in the afternoon, during Leo's nap, Sophia heard a car in the driveway that she did not recognize, followed by a knock at the door that carried immediately and unmistakably the exact wrong quality she had spent her whole life learning to detect: too hard, too impatient. The knock of someone who had already decided how this interaction was going to go before anyone answered. She did not open the door. She looked through the side window instead, the way her mother had once taught her without either of them ever naming what the lesson was actually preparing her for, and saw a man she did not recognize but whose photograph she had seen exactly once, months earlier, tucked discreetly into a folder of emergency contact information Claire had given her on her first day, along with a single sentence of explanation that Sophia had never forgotten. "If you ever see this man near my son, call the police immediately. Do not let him inside. Do not try to reason with him." Damon Whitfield had spent the 11 months since the restraining order in a state of escalating, carefully hidden obsession. Watching from a distance, he'd convinced himself qualified as legal compliance, gathering information about Claire's schedule through channels he should not have had access to, and building, in the private architecture of his own justifications, an entire narrative in which taking Leo, his son, he told himself, regardless of what any court order said, represented rescue rather than the felony kidnapping it would legally constitute. He had chosen that Tuesday specifically because he'd learned, through methods that would later become their own separate legal problem, that Claire would be in back-to-back meetings until at least 5. What he had not accounted for was Sophia. The dark and chaotic part of what happened next unfolded across less than 4 minutes, though it would feel to Sophia considerably longer. Damon, when Sophia did not answer the door, broke the frame near the lock with a single hard shoulder strike, a sound that sent Sophia moving before conscious thought, fully caught up with instinct. She grabbed her phone, dialed emergency services with shaking hands, and moved toward Leo's nursery rather than toward the noise, prioritizing, in the way her mother had once prioritized in a very different house, on a very different night, getting to the child before anything else mattered. She reached Leo, now screaming, pulled him from his crib, and turned to find Damon already in the doorway of the nursery. Having moved faster through the house than she'd calculated, what followed was not a negotiation. Damon demanded she hand over the child, insisted, with the specific, unstable certainty of a man who has spent months convincing himself of his own righteousness, that he had every right to his son, that Sophia was interfering in a family matter that was none of her business. Sophia Leo clutched against her chest, back toward the stairs rather than deeper into the room, buying distance, buying time, telling Damon, in a voice she fought to keep steady, that the police were already on their way, that this would only make things worse for him, that he needed to leave now while he still could. He grabbed her arm. It's hard enough to leave bruises that would show up vividly by evening. She twisted away, taking the scratch across her cheek from what she would later realize, checking herself in a mirror hours after the fact, was his own signet ring catching her skin as she pulled free, and made it to the top of the stairs, positioned between Damon and the door. Leo screaming against her shoulder, precisely as she heard, with a relief so total it nearly buckled her knees. Sirens turning onto the street outside, Damon fled through the back door seconds before the first patrol car arrived, a decision his lawyer would later describe as the only rational choice in an otherwise catastrophically irrational afternoon, leaving Sophia standing at the top of a shattered household with a screaming baby and a bleeding face. Exactly the scene Claire walked into 4 minutes later, having left her meeting the moment she saw 7 missed calls from an unfamiliar number that turned out to be the responding officer trying to reach her. Before she got home to a still unfolding scene, Claire's 40 seconds of misdirected, fury screaming at Sophia, ordering her out, reaching for her phone to call her attorney about liability rather than listening to a single word Sophia was trying to say ended the instant a police officer, still on scene, stepped forward and said, "Gently but firmly, ma'am. This woman just protected your son from an intruder. You need to sit down and let us explain what actually happened here." What Claire watched 20 minutes later on the nursery's baby monitor footage, which had been recording continuously the entire time, was 40 seconds of Sophia Reyes making a series of split-second decisions that had almost certainly kept Leo out of Damon Whitfield's hands. The choice to move toward the child rather than toward the noise. The choice to buy time with words while positioning herself as a physical barrier at the top of the stairs. The choice, in the specific chaotic 4 minutes of an active home invasion, to prioritize a child that was not biologically hers over her own physical safety in a way the footage made devastatingly, undeniably clear. Claire watched it twice. Then a third time, her hands pressed over her mouth, before she found Sophia sitting alone on the back porch steps, still holding an ice pack to her cheek, still visibly shaking from adrenaline that had not yet fully left her system. Claire sat down beside her without asking permission and said, "I am so sorry. I said the worst possible thing to you in the worst possible moment, and you had just saved my son's life," Sophia said. Quietly, "You were scared. Scared people say things they don't mean." Claire said, "That's generous of you. I don't think I deserve it yet." She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you run? The second you heard that door break, you could have gone out the back with Leo instead of toward him." Sophia considered the question for a long moment, the old weight of 15 years settling into her answer before she spoke it aloud for the first time to anyone outside her own family. She told Claire about the neighbor who hadn't made it, about the promise she'd made herself at 14, about the specific instinct that had driven her, without full conscious deliberation, toward the child rather than toward her own safety. Because somewhere in her she had already decided, years before she ever met the Whitfield family, that she would not survive standing by uselessly a second time if she had any power at all to do otherwise. Claire, listening, understood for the first time the full weight of what her instinctive fury had actually threatened to throw away in the months that followed. Once Damon Whitfield was arrested, charged, and given the violation of an existing restraining order combined with the home invasion, sentenced to a term that would keep him legally barred from any contact with Leo for years to come, Claire did not simply apologize and move forward, as though the 40 seconds in that entryway had been a small misunderstanding. She restructured Sophia's position entirely, raising her compensation substantially, formalizing a long-term contract with benefits Sophia hadn't previously had, and, more than any of the practical arrangements, made a point of telling Leo, even though he was far too young yet to understand it, the story of the day Sophia had stood at the top of the stairs and refused to let go. On Leo's first birthday, for months after that Tuesday, Claire stood in the same living room, the doorframe long since repaired, and raised a glass toward Sophia across a small gathering of close friends and family. She said, "I want everyone here to know that my son is alive and safe today," because of the woman standing in that corner trying to avoid this toast entirely. "I got it wrong the first time. I'm not going to get it wrong again," Sophia, embarrassed and moved in equal measure, said only quietly to Claire afterward. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to make sure I never had to live with the alternative again." If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to The Overlooked for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, has fear ever made you misjudge someone who was actually protecting you the whole time?